Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views report on British politics. The routine checks for products delivered to Northern Ireland would therefore be eliminated because there could be an agreement and the role of the ECJ is supposed to be clarified. The British government refers to ongoing talks, though. And that's all because a newspaper report says that the UK and the EU agreed on a customs agreement during the negotiations on the controversial Brexit Northern Ireland Protocol. The EU has approved a draft that no longer provides for routine checks on products shipped to Northern Ireland. That's at least what the Times newspaper reported on Tuesday. There are also concessions allegedly regarding the role of the European Court of Justice, the ECJ, so that they can only rule on Northern Irish matters if the case is referred to the Court of Justice by courts in Northern Ireland. However, the exact role of the ECJ has not yet been finally clarified, the report said, and I can't believe this anyway. When asked by the Reuters news agency, British government circles said that no agreement had yet been reached and that talks were still ongoing. 3 years after the UK formally left the EU, both sides are discussing how the largely open border between Northern Ireland, which is still part of the UK, and the EU member state Ireland should be shaped post-Brexit. The British government had negotiated the Northern Ireland Protocol as part of the EU exit, but has now declared the agreement to be impractical. In the collective bargaining conflict, employees want to demonstrate in numerous areas for significantly higher wages. Thousands of teachers across the country could stop working and many schools were therefore closed. Employees at universities and colleges, as well as train drivers and employees in government agencies, also wanted to take part in the walkout. According to the teachers' union, the government has offered NEW a 5% increase in wages. However, inflation was recently above 10%. The situation is similar in the other sectors. The Conservative Prime Minister Sunak rejects improvements. With the controversial law, the government wants to ensure that basic services are guaranteed, for example, for rescue workers and nursing staff, as well as firefighters and the railways. The unions reject the plan as undemocratic. Strikes have also been announced for the coming days. In view of the acute shortage of staff in many sectors, the British Finance Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer Jeremy Hunt, has called on early retirees to rethink. To everyone who retired early after the pandemic or didn't find the right role after short-time work, I say, Britain needs you. That was said by Hunt in London on Friday in a speech on his plans for the British economy. It should also be made easier for people who suffer from chronic or mental illnesses to re-enter the labour market. In addition to the pandemic-related exodus from the labour market, Brexit is also largely responsible for the shortage of staff. In many areas, such as gastronomy or logistics, there is a shortage of workers. These jobs used to be held by EU citizens. However, many of them left in the pandemic and around Brexit. Now it is no longer easy to come to the UK to work because of expensive visas. And according to the Times, the British government is also considering changing the rules for international students to allow them to work more than 20 hours a week. However, there is concern that these visas could then be used as a shortcut to a work visa, which Conservatives want to avoid. While the International Monetary Fund's, the IMF's economic forecast for 23 has brought relief to much of the world, the UK is feeling hungover. According to estimates by the IMF experts, the British economy will not grow this year, but rather shrink by 0.6%. The country thus brings up the rear in the IMF analysis published on Tuesday and performs worse than Russia, which has been subject to extensive sanctions for its war of aggression against Ukraine. According to the IMF experts, the reason for the bleak outlook is the austere tax and monetary policy and the persistently high energy prices, which are putting a strain on household wallets. The IMF figures showed the UK is not immune to the pressures almost all developed economies are facing. UK Finance Minister Jeremy Hunt told Sky News the same, and he referred to long-term forecasts that Great Britain should grow faster than Germany and Japan. For the Conservative British government, the forecast on the third anniversary of the exit from the EU is not very flattering. The weak growth is mainly due to a shortage of workers. The director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, Paul Johnson, told this to the BBC on Tuesday. The trigger for this was, among other things, Brexit, which made immigration from the EU considerably more difficult. However, the exit from the EU has also brought with it other challenges that are hampering British economic growth. Among other things, the British economy is suffering from the country's political instability in recent years. According to British intelligence services, Moscow could deliberately spread misinformation about the progress of its own troops in Ukraine. In recent days, Russian online commentators have been reporting on significant breaches in Ukraine's defense lines in the Zaporizhia region and near the city of Vuhledar in the Donbas region. Britain's Defense Ministry reported in its daily briefing on Twitter on Friday. In fact, Russian troops are said to have carried out local reconnaissance attacks in these places, but made no decisive progress, as sources in London said. The Russians may have wanted to give the impression that their advance was gaining momentum. The British Ministry of Defence has published daily information on the course of the war since the beginning of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, and they are citing intelligence information. In doing so, the British government wants to both counter the Russian propaganda and keep allies in line. Moscow accuses London of a disinformation campaign, of course. In future, British farmers will be financially rewarded for protecting nature and improving the environment as a substitute for EU subsidies. A total of 280 different measures have been announced, as the Guardian newspaper reported on Thursday. For example, there is money for farmers who plant wildflowers or winter fodder for birds, maintain hedges, or tend moors. £1 billion from a total annual pot of £2.4 billion is earmarked for this. Agriculture Minister Therese Coffey said the payments would protect the planet. Farmers largely welcomed the project. However, criticism has been leveled that the plans have only just been presented and that farmers have not received sufficient support since Brexit, and that's 3 years ago. The EU subsidies were mainly calculated according to the size of the cultivated area. And this concludes this week's video on British politics, and I'll see you in my next one tomorrow. I'll be back.